The Treasury Secretary is pressing China to give American movies greater access, raising conflict of interest concerns given his financial ties to the film industry. Washington, Wonder Woman, the 2017 film that Stephen Mnuchin helped produce before becoming Treasury Secretary, hauled in about $90 million at the box office in China. It was the film's most successful international market and a roaring success for an American superhero export. But because of China's strict laws for foreign films, the studio behind the movie, Warner Brothers, received just a small fraction of those revenues. Now, as Treasury Secretary and one of the lead negotiators in trade talks with China, Mr. Mnuchin has been personally pushing Beijing to give the American film industry greater access to its markets, a change that could be highly lucrative to his former industry. While Mr. Mnuchin divested from his Hollywood film production company after joining the Trump administration, he maintains ties to the industry through his wife, the actress and filmmaker Louise Linton. In 2017, Mr. Mnuchin sold his interest in the company, Stormchaser Partners, to Ms. Linton, who at the time was his fiancée. In his 2018 disclosure, which was obtained from the Treasury Department through a records request by the New York Times, Stormchaser is listed as one of Ms. Linton's assets. Since they are now married, government ethics rules consider the asset to be owned by Mr. Mnuchin. And while the documents show that Mr. Mnuchin sold his stake to Ms. Linton for $1 million to $2 million, he is now owed that same amount, in addition to interest, from Stormchaser in 2026, according to the 2018 form. Mr. Mnuchin's remaining ties to the film industry are raising questions among ethics officials and lawmakers about whether a conflict of interest exists. At a congressional hearing on Thursday, Mr. Mnuchin was questioned by a top Senate Democrat about those continuing financial ties. The Office of Government Ethics still has not certified his 2018 financial disclosure, which is the first since his marriage to Ms. Linton. Access to China's film market has not been a primary issue in the trade talks, which have focused largely on Beijing's treatment of foreign companies, including its requirement that firms hand over valuable technology, its barriers to foreign business and its subsidies to Chinese firms. But Mr. Mnuchin has championed more equitable treatment of American films in China, viewing existing restrictions on foreign entertainment as part of the problematic behavior the Trump administration is trying to correct. Under the current system, foreign companies must secure Chinese partners to enter China's market and they are restricted in how much they can earn as part of the arrangements. China applies a strict quota for the number of Hollywood films it lets into its theaters. For most box office showings, Chinese companies take in 75% of all revenue, leaving the remainder to Hollywood. To operate in the tightly managed Chinese entertainment sector, American companies have also had to form a vast network of complicated ties with Chinese state-owned firms. Since the trade talks began last year, film lobbyists have met with Mr. Mnuchin's top deputies, as well as with officials from the Commerce Department and the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Mr. Mnuchin has been especially responsive to lobbying from the film industry, according to people familiar with the discussions, given his background and understanding of the challenges that American moviemakers face in China. At a congressional hearing last month, Robert Lighthizer, President Trump's top trade negotiator, said increasing the revenue share earned by American film companies in China was absolutely a priority in the talks, and he highlighted Mr. Mnuchin's role. Secretary Mnuchin has been very much involved. Mr. Lighthizer added. He of course knows a great deal about that industry, a lot more than I do. On Thursday, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, the top Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, raised concerns about Mr. Mnuchin's financial ties to the film industry and asked the Treasury Secretary whether he had, in fact, really divested himself of the Stormchaser asset listed on his disclosure form. Mr. Wyden also suggested that the transaction might have been more of a loan to Ms. Linton than a true financial separation from Stormchaser. What we have wondered is if there has been an exchange of an asset for a loan rather than a divestment. Mr. Wyden said. Mr. Mnuchin declined to discuss details of the transaction, but said that his financial disclosures were certified by career ethics officials in the Treasury Department. I am advised by people at Treasury that I am fully in compliance and I have no ethical issues. Mr. Mnuchin said. When asked by reporters after the hearing why his Stormchaser ties did not represent a conflict of interest, Mr. Mnuchin said that he would not discuss any specific assets. Treasury noted separately that Mr. Mnuchin's disclosure was certified internally on June 27, 2018, and that the department was working with the Office of Government Ethics to obtain its certification. Mr. Mnuchin and Ms. Linton, who married in 2017, brought Hollywood glitz to Washington, but their continuing links to the film industry have also brought complications. After working for 17 years at Goldman Sachs, Mr. Mnuchin in the last decade became a big name in Hollywood as a film investor. His companies, Dune Entertainment and later Rat Pack Dune, helped produce and finance dozens of films that were box office smashes in China, including Avatar, Gravity, Dunkirk, Wonder Woman, and Ready Player One. Mr. Mnuchin was also a co-chairman of Relativity Media, a fledgling Hollywood studio that had a joint venture in China. During his confirmation hearing in 2017, Mr. Mnuchin said that Relativity's joint venture in China was not particularly successful. He said that he was not aware of direct Chinese investment in the business but that, in the future, Chinese investments in Hollywood may need to be reviewed by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which the Treasury Secretary oversees. Mr. Mnuchin agreed to divest from dozens of investments in early 2017, after he was nominated by Mr. Trump. Later that year, he sent a letter of apology to the Office of Government Ethics after appearing to promote one of his movies when he said at an event, "Send all your kids to Lego Batman."